Good morning to you all.
Morning.
Before I ever begin a spiritual address, I do not know what Spirit's going to move me to say, but my prayer is always that they help me to serve you well. And I want to start by saying that it's an honor to be able to stand in this space to allow the Spirit to work with all of us. Now, to start with that, this community, this center, this Inner Spiritual Center was formed 10 years ago, almost 11. And it's created a space for all of us to come in through COVID, especially Reverend Sharon and the advisory board and the pastors and the healers, etc., did their part at keeping things going. And for that, I want to say thank you. But for each of us, as living human beings, hopefully living, right? As human beings walking on this planet, how do we live into our divinity? Question mark. Now, living into our divinity sounds like a very broad experience and a very grandiose experience and a very wow, big, hey, Richard, how do you live into your divinity? Right? But living into our divinity is not big or grandiose or wow. Living into our divinity is living into who we are meant to be in this world. Irrelevant of money, irrelevant of stature, irrelevant to our clothing, irrelevant to anything external. Living into our divinity is living into our hearts. As I hit 58 this year, I've noticed that this particular year, I'm looking back over my 58 years, and there are moments where I'm remembering my childhood, and there are moments where I'm remembering my high school years, and there are moments where I'm remembering my past relationship, my current relationship, and what I've done to live into that relationship, those relationships, those experiences in ways that might have hurt people. I think it's natural for us as we progress along this life and in this world to look back at what we've done and in some ways take stock. And so in that, I cannot change what I've done. But I have begun to express apology where I can. One of the things the spiritual realm tells us when they show up from the spirit side of life to give a message is tell them I'm sorry. I mean, you've heard that more than once in this center. You've heard that more than once from a medium somewhere where they've said, oh, Grandma, I'm just exaggerating the person, it doesn't matter who the communicator, but Grandma wants you to know she's sorry for the time she slapped you on your hiney. Okay? It's an exaggerated expression, but you all understand it. So why wait until we're on the spirit side of life to have to come through a fantastic medium and say, hey, tell that person I'm sorry? Why wait? A couple of weeks ago, actually, it's August 6th, so it's 4 weeks ago, I had this moment. I was driving in the car, and I was feeling this sense of bliss, and I was like, wow, who doesn't love bliss? And this was not through any other means other than feeling myself in a state of connection to the divine, the divinity of all things within me. Wasn't drinking, I wasn't on any painkillers or anything like that. It was a moment where spirit said, here you go. So I'm in the car and all of a sudden flashes in my former partner, because if I say a former partner, you're going to think, oh my God, how many partners did he have? My former partner.
Richard, too many to count.
Right. I'm blushing more with that statement than I was with Sharon's introduction. The point was, I thought of a former partner, and while we have been apart 28 years, picked up the phone. Now I've spoken to him a couple of times over the course of 28 years, probably 5 in 28 years. Hey, how are you? What's going on? And I could feel a little bit of the awkwardness, but at the same time, it was nice to be able to just be and not go through the historical. In a previous phone call with him, I apologized for my part at the end of the relationship. But in that moment, when Spirit inspired me in that moment to be in a state of bliss and to feel my heart and my divinity, nothing else mattered but this wonderful human being and myself in that moment, just making a connection and saying, hi, how are you? Now, that's not to say, ladies and gentlemen, that every experience that we have in relationship can be corrected perfectly. That's not to say that every human being that has crossed your path that has hurt you, you're going to have resolution with. But if we can live into our divinity here and express our divine nature, irrelevant to finance, irrelevant to stature, irrelevant to clothing, irrelevant to shoes, if we can stand here in our divinity, just stay in a place of love and look at one another and acknowledge that we see each other. We see our humanity. It is shared. We see each other's pain. We understand. We experience each other's joy. And we celebrate with each other. Therein, to me, lies the expression of God. Therein, to me, lies the expression of love. Can we do it perfectly? Absolutely not. 58 years are telling me that I have been, at times, not a good brother, not a good uncle, not a good stepfather, not a good grandpa, at times. Could I sit here and pull apart every moment that I made a human error? I could, and I'd make myself crazy. But I pray, I hope that when we look at our lives, we can see the sum total of the times where we made amends, where we lived into our hearts, and where we could correct things as we go, where we could correct things as we go. I can remember a moment very early in my life when my father shared a piece of information with me, and I was so enraged. I was angry. And in my house, my father was a drill instructor, God bless him. You could not get angry with my father. But I expressed to him how angry I was because he shared something with me that hurt me deeply. A couple of years later, when I was in my first relationship and I was out of the house and I was living into my life, not in a family environment, but in the beginning of my own adulthood, I turned to my father and I said, God, I'm sorry. And he looked at me. My father was not a crying man. He cried 3 times in my life. At my grandfather's wake, when I came out to him as a medium, because I gave him information that was irrefutable and he could not, in his mind, change it. And this time, he started crying and he said, I get it. And I'm sorry I held you to a standard that was unattainable. It wasn't fair. Why am I telling this story? Why am I sharing this personal piece with you? Because, ladies and gentlemen, we don't know how our judgment or our actions will affect another. All we can do is endeavor to do our part, to live into our divine nature to the best of our ability, and to express apology where we can, and love as much as we can. I made a little bit of humor about being embarrassed about Sharon's introduction course. We have a friendship now since 2008. That's 14, almost 15 years. But in the experience of friendship, Sharon's been one of the people that can help me to be a better human being in the world by her example. Let's take that out into this center and what's resonating out into Zoom to all of the people who show up. This community was formed with a vision. That vibration is in this room right now and on Zoom. We are all standing here in this moment in our divine nature. Because Spirit impressed one woman to do something. She was true to that vision. All of us have the great privilege to be able to be in our divinity even more fully because we're in this experience with Spirit right due to this moment. I love you. And I know you're not comfortable with it.
Stay back.
The point of this is not just about sharing. This is about what's been created within our lives for us to have the chance to be able to experience our divine nature. So I say thank you to Sharon. I say thank you to the Inner Spiritual Center and all who are involved. But let's bring it home by bringing it back to the individual. Each of us has a choice in our lives at any given moment to accept our divinity, to see ourselves as love, and to move from that space as best we can. And in the moments where we struggle with it, go back in our memory to the moments where things are good and say, no, I can get it. My prayer for each of us is that as we walk on this planet further into our lives, we continue to remember the divinity that we hold, that we express, and that we love. To all of you, I say thank you for allowing me to stand here to remind you. God bless us all.